Right, welcome to another episode of Family Affair Faith Edition. This is a special episode. My name is James Davis. I'm your host for today. And today's episode, we'll be discussing grief. I got some of my friends with me, and I have Miss Tasha McGee. All right, and I have Mr. Kendall Ford. I have Miss Rocelyn Gray, and I have Mr. Lawrence Lemon, and I have Miss Arnette Storey, and you will hear from them in a little bit. But I just wanted I decided to do a show on grief because many times we don't talk about it a lot, right? We don't talk about it in the home, and we kind of fade over it, all right? And I want to, first of all, I want each person to introduce themselves in just maybe 15 seconds about what you do, your profession, and etc. And I want to start with Miss Natasha McGee. I'm sorry.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Tasha, is what people call me. I am a special education teacher currently, and I teach middle school. I am your basic homebody. And what you'll find through this conversation is that it'll probably be some surprising things about how I process grief. So I look forward to sharing with everyone on that topic.
And Ms. Rocelyn?
My name is Dr. Rocelyn Gray, also known as Dr. Rowe, and I'm an endodontist, which is a root canal specialist on hiatus and pursuing my current passion, which is baking delicious cakes. And I have a whole lot to say about grief because I've had a lot of losses in my life.
Ms. Arnette?
Hi, I'm Arnette Storey. I'm a retired IT specialist for the federal government. I now work for St. Stephen Church as the administrator of the Hardin County campus. I too am acquainted with grief. I've had a lot of loss in my family, particularly the loss of a child, and you'll learn more about that later.
Mr. Kendall?
Hello, my name is Kendall Ford. I'm actually the senior pastor at the Woodsonville Baptist Church, and which is the church that I grew up in as a kid. I also am a level 2 apprentice in the funeral home business, as well as I'm in nursing and have been there. Actually, tomorrow will be 18 years. So I have dealt with grief, especially being the pastor and pastor in most of my home, all of my family, and dealing with my mother's grief was probably the hardest, and my brother. During the mother's grief, I actually was not in the funeral home business, but with my brother, I did the whole process. So grief is something very challenging to deal with.
Last but not least, Mr. Lawrence Lemon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lawrence Lemon. I am the creative director at Get Creative, which is an integrated creative learning and design agency. That's a lot to talk about as far as educational consulting. That's what we do. We also work with the levels of marketing and branding for nonprofits, faith-based organizations, as well as in the school districts across the nation. I'm also a dancer choreographer, and so that is another form that I operate in. And the element of grief is something that I would initially say, unfortunately, I'm well versed in. However, I realize and understand its presence and its purpose in our lives. And so I think that that is something that I'll be able to touch and speak on throughout this process.
Listen, I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to dive right in. As you know, everybody on this call, we have experienced grief, and I'm just an upfront, raw person, and I want us to really talk about it. I don't want to sugarcoat anything, and I was sharing something with you. Okay, so my grieving has been, and I'll start with my mom. She passed in May of 19, okay? And she had been sick, but it was kind of sudden because she was coherent on Wednesday, Okay, she was coherent on Thursday, not coherent on Friday. Took her to the hospital. She passed on Monday. Okay, and we stayed at the hospital that whole time, and I was really in disbelief. I was in disbelief. I couldn't believe it, and honestly, to this day, I can't believe it. You know what I'm saying? And it's been 2 years, and one of the things that I thought about, and I'm gonna go ahead and tell my side. I was angry. I was angry with God. Okay, I was angry because if anybody knows my mother, she was a prayer warrior. She prayed for everybody. She prayed people through, and I'm praying people through. And then I was like, well, Lord, what happened? What happened? You know what I'm saying? And it for a long time, and because I'm a church boy, I know how to go to church and be front and go through the motions, shout you down, drive a song, shout, dance, and all that type of stuff, and go back to my business of being mad. All right. So that's where I was as far as, we talk about the 5 steps. They say the 5 steps of grieving. You know what I'm saying? Whatever order, you know what I'm saying? But I'm gonna start it off like that. When my mom passed, like I said, 2019. In my mind, it was sudden. Okay, so I'm taking this moment and dealing with that process. All right, who wants to jump in? Natasha, go ahead.
I can jump in. My mother passed in April of 2017, and it was unexpected. I said she came to Louisville to visit on Friday, and we had did some activities. It was time for her to go home. I said, all right, Ma, I'll see you later. And that was it. Saturday morning, I called, no answer. And so it was and is something that I deal with daily. It is, I can't tell you at any given moment what stage of grief I'm in or where I am. I know in the beginning, I stayed in the denial stage for a long time. I remember specifically when I shut down, and it was when I did the quote unquote previewing. I remember going in there, and when I saw her in that box, it was like, oh, my computer shut down, and everything after that was autopilot. And when I say after that, I don't mean for the services, I don't mean for the burial. I was on autopilot for months. And, to be very transparent and honest, my mother died in April. I went through, we had some transitional things going on during that summer. I went back to work because I'm a teacher, so I had the summer off. I went back to work in August, and by October, I was completely out of it. And so literally I had to take 2 months off of work. I checked myself into a facility because I was not okay. I was in a place where I realized I could not continue in the way that I had been. I already suffer from anxiety, and with her passing, my anxiety increased. And so the level that I had grown to with my medication and with just the Xanax and all those things, it was unsafe. And so I did have to take that time to kind of reset. Every day it's a fight to not be on autopilot for me, because it was just me and my mom. It was just the two of us. And so though those who know me know my mama came to college after I did. And so just having that, I don't think you can ever be prepared, but having it the way it happened was traumatic for me. And when I say traumatic, I mean it was actually traumatic. And so, it's been a journey. It is something where I had to become comfortable with the grief. I kept waiting for it to go away. And what I realized is it doesn't go away. You just learn to deal with it a little bit differently. I'm not an outward processor, generally speaking, on a regular basis anyway. And so just having the opportunity and the time and allowing myself some grace to grieve in the way that I am is probably the biggest gift that I've given myself.
Mr. Ford.
All right, I would like to say that grief has been very challenging for me. On April the 9th, April the 10th, 2009, it was Good Friday, and my mother was always my best friend. Mind you, she had 6 children, 3 born on the same day, but different years, all 3. And then I came. And so for a long time, everybody thought I was either our only child or I was just the baby. But then 8 and 13 years later, 2 more came. So it was always a struggle, but our mother made us feel like we were all the special one, you know, we was her favorite. And like I said, on Good Friday, I called in to work because she was in Bowling Green. She had been on dialysis, a double amputee. You wouldn't have knew she was a double amputee due to diabetes and stuff of that nature. But she had a spirit that just taught us that you just keep on no matter what. And because of that, I felt like I really didn't grieve because we were there when she died. We were holding hands, we prayed, did all the things. And yet being the pastor, she had told me previously, I said, Mama, if something happens to you, who actually does your service? And she said, who's my pastor? And I was like, me. And so from that point, I had to realize, okay, I've got to do this. So, and I was the one in my family that does everything. I'm the go-to for whatever. And so here I realized, okay, I'm trying to grieve. I got to do the eulogy, which her eulogy, you know, I believe she lived that. So it made it easier for me to stand up there. But the process of me just trying to be supportive to everyone else, and oh, you're the pastor, you can't cry, you can't show no emotions. So it was just like totally, it just messed me up. And so for years, I was afraid to grieve. I kept wanting to grieve, but yet I felt like if I let my guard down, then it was just going to be a terrible thing because people are going to see the pastors, he can't handle his situation. And then on top of that, my brother for 8 years battled cancer. And he had me in my mind believing after so long, and I knew because I've been in healthcare and seen the signs and watched stuff. And so on that particular day, he came to my hospital and actually came for a blood transfusion. And in the process of that blood transfusion, he coded and died. And I had just left to get everything for him on my way back to get him to take him back. And they're calling saying, hurry up and get here. And I was like, oh my God. So then now I'm the level 2 apprentice. So now I've got to call it. Well, actually, when I'm in there, I help with the doctor. I finally says, just call the code and let him go because he's okay. But in the process, then I've got to go to the funeral home. I've got to prepare his body. I've got to, and I really don't have to, but I felt like that was the way for me to grieve. Because he kept saying, now, if something happens, who's going to do this? And he kept saying, you going to preach and all this stuff. And I was like, no, I'm not doing none of that. But in my mind, I told him that, but I knew that was something he wanted. So I had to do that to actually do the process of grieving. And because of that whole scenario between my mom and my brother, I was like, Lord, I just don't know how much more I can take. But I mean, it's been my brother's been dead 3 years, and I keep going to the funeral home, and not only with me, I try to do it with every other family to help them with my church family. So like I say, that grief is the response to the loss. And I felt like now I let out, I cry sometimes, I just get excited. I go through happy times, bad times, but I believe if I just respond in the way that will release that pressure from me, then it'll help me to grow stronger.
All right, Mr. Lemon.
So I would say grief for me started early, very early. I come from a very large and wonderful family. So my grandmother had 10 children. And out of those 10 children, there is too many nephews and cousins and everybody else to name. However, I do remember, of course, one of my first moments of grief was losing my grandmother. Me and my grandmother were very tight, and I was very special to her. And I'm not just saying that, everybody says that too. But losing her, and then losing my uncle while in elementary school, when Tasha was talking about the trauma of it, the traumatic experience, my uncle actually was murdered when I was in elementary school. And I remember just coming into the house, my dad came and picked us up. Me and my sister were in school together at that time. And, just in the car, my dad, it was just different because first of all, my dad was there on time. My dad never really was there on time picking us up, but he picked us up a little bit early from school and said, something happened with your uncle, but he didn't really know. I knew he didn't have the words. I understand now he didn't have the words how to explain that, but coming into the home and experiencing, because my mother was, our house was like one of the houses that we were together at. And so everyone was at our home. And I remember coming into the home and hearing the sounds of grief and hearing these different things, not really able to understand them. But being in that particular age time was kind of just so sent up to my room. And so we went up to our room, and in the middle, I hear my cousin downstairs screaming. I hear my cousin over here cursing and, talking about she hates God and all these different kind of things. And I'm like, well, what? Because we're a church family. So that was, once again, I was young, couldn't quite process it. So I remember going to my room, and I've always been creative and always had a great imagination. I remember having this conversation with one of my little toys in there. I'm talking to the toy like, hey, what's going on? And just trying to figure that out at that age. Then, carrying that process and then go to one of my close cousins. She actually passed of cancer towards my senior year of college. And not really, once again, that was a situation where I wasn't really told what was really going on with her. It was like I knew she was sick, but she's sick, she's young, in her early mid-20s, she just sick, she's gonna get better. I'll never forget, I was at I believe it was homecoming. I was at homecoming and I got the call and I had to turn around and come on. I'm like, what? Y'all told me. I didn't know that she was going to die. And my family kind of, once again, didn't have the right words or didn't want us to worry about that while we were in school. But when we get to the point of what I say is the greatest, the greatest grief in my life would be the loss of my mother. And I would say that, and I tell people all the time, like, there's no loss. Like, there's no loss. And only loss that I can even imagine to be the loss is a mother losing a child. That's the only other loss that I think could possibly outweigh the loss of a mother. And my mother passed on Thanksgiving Day in November 23rd, 2006. And wasn't ready for that. Not at all. My mother was a pastor. I'm a PK, born and raised in church. At that time I was working alongside her in the ministry, and and from my knowledge base, I was doing everything. Look, I was going in that Bible, getting all the scriptures and everything else on healing and all those things. And so that particular time when it did not turn out the way that I believed it was going to, or thought it should have, because my mother was very, very active and very, very resilient. My mother was only 57 when she passed. So young, I'm thinking like, you're gonna come back, you're gonna bounce back. Had never been sick. The only time she'd been in hospitals to give birth to the children. Every time she ever had the surgery was with me. She had to have a C-section with me. So, other than that, just life was moving on. And so my thought was this is going to turn out another way. But it turned out the way that God so willed, didn't understand it. And like when Tasha, we said that breakdown that happened for you happened with me on the way out of Cleveland Clinic, because I'll never forget it. I lost it. I'm like, we're not supposed to be leaving without you. I remember saying that. We're not supposed to be leaving without you. I got angry. James, I got angry at God. I was very, very upset with God. And then I was confused. I'm like, Lord, if you didn't do this for her, I know I'm a lost cause. Like, look, because if you ain't bring her out of this, I know what I've been up to. So, but God continued to be God in the midst of all of that. And then 10 years later, I lose my father. And I became my father's caregiver. So the concept of working, and I'll say primary caregiver, but that relationship, me and my dad's relationship is like I can't even, you know, it's funny, we talk about, we were like the same person, but it's totally different. But my dad was a lot older than my mother. So I lost my father, he was 95 when he passed. And so just that entire process and moving and kind of dealing with life, learning how to live in the midst of death. And so my dad used to say, there was one of his statements, and I didn't understand it. He said, but in the midst of life, there's death. And I never understood that until I continued to live and understanding that this is a process of life. And the grieving process is individual, it is real, it's necessary. That's the thing about it. It's necessary. And it's actually a process that for me, it wasn't about me. You know what I'm saying? That what I've dealt with, what I've gone through, you know, as personal and as deep it is, it was not for me. And I witnessed that and recognized that as I've had to walk other friends through their process of grieving. I was 28 when my mother passed. And so, you know, that's young, you know, to me, you know, but then I had to think about one of my friends from church who lost her mother when she was 21, you know, so all these different things about processing. But grief for me is something that's real. It's something that I would say those are like those points, because everybody in my life that I lost it's just like, I can't even process. But one of the most challenging ones is actually with the loss of my son's, my best friend, James Stowe. So for me, my dad passed in 15, Stowe passed in 16, you know, so my life has always been going on. I just lost an aunt earlier this year. I lost an aunt in 2 years ago, 2008, 3 years ago, 2018. So grief is kind of a consistent state, I would say, but it's learning how to live in that.
Most definitely. And I'm gonna go to Dr. Rowe and then Mr. Arnette, because I want to dive into some questions for each of you. I want to go Dr. Rowe first.
Wow. Where do I even begin? Many of you may not know that I was married before, and I became a widow at 41. And I was not expecting that. My husband, he was a kidney transplant recipient, and he would always say to me, you know, live each day to the fullest, because you never know if tomorrow is promised to you. And I guess I would hear him, and I sort of took that for granted. And then I went home for Christmas of 2006 with plans to return on before New Year's. And I had spoken to him that Christmas morning. And then later on that evening, his mom calls me and asks me, Ro, have you heard from Mo? And then I just got a sinking feeling, because I knew his routine. And I was like, I just knew it. It was like something had left out of me. And for me, I was in private practice at that time. So pretty much my family and we packed up from Arkansas, because my mom and dad, everybody was down in Arkansas. And the reason Mo wasn't there was because he was in management for UPS, and Christmas time was their biggest season. So he could not get away. And I was like, I'm just going to go down here for a couple of days, and I will see you before the new year. And never talked to him again. And I had a lot of guilt about that, because me being in the medical profession, you know, I think I can fix everything and have an answer for everything. And I was guilty because I was not there. And what kept going through my mind, would it have been different if I had been at home? And so I wrestled with that for a long time. Then it took me years later to realize that I was angry at God about that, because I was like, man, God, I thought you brought me to one, and then now he's gone. But how I dealt with it, I had to go back to work, because no one could be in that practice but me. And so I kind of had to come back, take care of his affairs, and head right on back to the office, shake it off, smile, how you doing? And be about the business of running a practice and seeing patients. And I did that for 9 years on autopilot. And I thought I had dealt with grief, but in reality, I hadn't. And I was really fooling myself. You know, I didn't go to grief counseling. Yes, I prayed and I talked to God about it, but I really didn't deal with it because for the first few years, I thought it was a joke. You know, I would sit at home and I would think, well, he's going to come around the corner in a minute, you know, those types of things, just really being in denial. And then I get mad at God about it and say, well, oh, that's right. You took him on to heaven. And then I would, you know, question God. Why did you leave me to be a widow at 41? You know, all of that went through my head. But at the same time, I still had to take care of a practice and take care of patients. And now I had to take care of a home by myself. So I had all of that going on, was very active in church, was on every committee, praise team, you name it, Ro was doing it. And so, you know, that was sort of the story of my life. And then in 2017, we celebrated my mom's birthday on November 16th. And my mom and I have probably communicated with one another since birth. Well, they were going to my nephew's game in Arkansas. And that was the one morning that I did not talk to mom. And then I get a phone call from my brother. And he's saying to me, are you sitting down? I need to tell you something. And I broke down. And it was difficult for me because it was an automobile accident. My dad was driving. My younger sister was sitting behind my mom, and she almost lost her life. And I just didn't really know how to process all of that because I was in shock. I blamed myself for not talking to my mom that morning. Then I got really angry with my dad, and I was in denial about that, you know, because I mean, I do understand that God knows, and when it's your time, it's your time. But just the circumstances and how my mom passed, it was hard for me. And at this time, I was a professor at the dental school. So I had all of these responsibilities. We were short staffed. Now I'm really getting angry, but I internalized all of this stuff. You know, yes, I had my moments of wailing and crying out to God, missing mom and everything, but I really didn't deal with the anger, nor had I dealt with the anger from losing my spouse at a young age. So we're talking about stuff that had just been percolating for years. And for me, I crashed and burned. One day I went into work and I just couldn't do it anymore. I literally shut down and I ghosted. People didn't see me. They were like, anybody seen, where's Dr. Rowe? Dr. Rowe had hit rock bottom because it just came all crashing down at one time. And then, you know, it was at that time that I realized that's why I preach a lot about, hey, don't have no shame in getting therapy. Because I probably should have had it 15 years ago. Because this December will be 15 years that my first spouse had passed away. Because I didn't process that and deal with it effectively. And it's okay to grieve. But when you're trying to be on autopilot and be there and it for everybody and still dealing with the grief, it is hard. And one day I just couldn't do it because I'm the oldest in my family. And so everybody always looked to me for the answers. And one day I was like, sis don't have any answers. I can't help you. I can't help myself. I don't know if I'm going to make it to see tomorrow. I mean, it got that bad. And it got to the point that when I was even working, I couldn't hide it anymore. You know, sometimes I'd be at work, I'd go in my office and just bawl and cry, you know, because I would be that sad. And it's not easy. I still have my moments, you know, especially with my mom, because my mom was my best friend and we talked about everything all the time. And I find myself, you know, oh, well, let me call mom and ask her about that. And then I have to realize that, well, you know, you're not able to do that. And then some days I'll just break down and start bawling. And other days I do better. But the grieving process, it's been a long process for me. And I can say now that I am finally starting to heal, but it took years. It took years for me to come to that realization that, one, I needed help outside of myself and my family, and to be honest about the emotions that I really had surrounding loss and grief.
Most definitely. I do want to take a brief break so that we have some announcements for you. So we'll be right back in 1 minute.
Some people refuse to do this to a good Funyun, but if you take a Funyun and put a damp paper towel on it and put it in the microwave for just a little bit to sogify.
That's an official word now. He just made that up.
To sogify your Funyun. Well, hello everybody. My name is Ken Jobst and I am here with my wife,
Elisa Lee.
And I've got to tell you what, I'm so excited to have you back to Taste and See on SSC Live TV. I've had some of the best pickled stuff ever in the history of food. Pickled cucumbers, right?
Which are just usually regular pickles.
Welcome back to a Family Affair Faith Edition. We want to continue with some of our guests, and we left off with Dr. Rowe talking about her grief, but we want to go briefly to Miss Arnette because we have so many questions that I have to get out. But I need Miss Arnette to talk about, her grieving process.
Okay, well, I'm the mother of two. I had my first child at the age of 16. Angela Dawn was her name, and we pretty much grew up together. We went through a lot of things together, and we were just best friends. I can identify with everybody who's told their story so far because Tasha, she and I were like you and your mom, just this close. She went to Los Angeles because she wanted to be an entertainer. But me being the mom I am, I'm like, you're not going to Los Angeles without a plan B, Missy. So being the child she was, she decided that plan B should be nursing. So she got her bachelor's in nursing, and in 2003 took off for California, for Los Angeles, and she got there within 6 months. She stayed with my father for about 6 months, and she became an RN at Cedars-Sinai Hospital there in Los Angeles on the trauma ward, and everything was going well. June of 2004, my stepsister was battling complications from hepatitis C, and she entered the hospital, and 3 days later, all of her organs shut down, and 3 days later she was gone. So I called on that Wednesday to let Angela know that Yvonne had passed, and she said, "Okay, Mom, I'll make arrangements. I'll make arrangements to get to St. Louis for the funeral." So Thursday, I didn't hear from her. Friday, I didn't hear from her. And I'm getting a little concerned, and I left a message for her. Hey, girl, let me know something because I need to be at the airport. I was, I sing in church. I sang in church in St. Louis as well. And I offered to sing at my stepsister's funeral. So I was at church rehearsing with the musician for my sister's funeral. And my other sisters come to the church. Now, they don't come to the church, okay, unless they are CMEs, Christmas, Mother's Day, and Easter. They came to the church and they were together. And I'm like, what are you doing here? And they said, Lala's gone. And I looked. So I looked at the other one and she said, she's not here anymore. And that didn't make any sense. So I looked at the other one and she said, your dad found her. That didn't make any sense. Then it hit me. Your daughter is dead. Well, I got sick and I cried out. And I actually had to identify her secondhand to the coroner's office. I can't really tell you all the details because God put me in a place to take care of business. And I know Dr. Rowe, you and Kendall, you've both spoken about that. He put you in a place where you take care of business. And I did that. I went to Los Angeles. They would not let me see her body because she had been deceased since that Thursday, which meant that her body had a level of decomposition. If she had been there a few more hours, she would not have been able to have an open casket service. That's how it was. I'm trying to make it a little shorter, but as with all of you, we kind of relive these things as we talk about them. God put me in a place of such peace for that period of time that I spoke. Angela had 3 different funeral services. I had to go through 3 different memorial services for her. I had to go through the hospital service. She worked at Cedars-Sinai. Within that year, she had become so beloved that they actually had to put us in a room so that her staff and her friends could come to us and express their grief to us, my sister and I. And then I spoke at that memorial service. I sang at her wake in Los Angeles. I'm like, who are you, kid? I can only give that to God. And then her final resting place was St. Louis, Missouri, where I'm from. I could not lose it. I couldn't break down because she has a younger sister. And that younger sister was losing a whole half of her support system. When Angela died, she was 8 years old. So I couldn't lose it. I had to be what I had to be. I continued to be who I had to be until it was about 18 months later. And I couldn't be who I needed to be or who I felt I needed to be. I did what you did, Dr. Rowe, and I ghosted. I simply dropped because I didn't have any more to give. And I'm going to tell you guys, it's going to sound weird, but the devil. There was a voice in my head that said, you let your daughter go to Los Angeles and get killed. She was murdered. You let her go get killed. What are you doing all this for? Why are you living? You need to just, so I was actually waiting for death. So my pastor at that time called, and he left a message. I had hundreds of messages on my phone because I was not able to respond to anyone. My neighbors had a sneaky way of checking on me. I had a computer at the time, and they would send the teenage daughter upstairs to use the computer, but they were actually checking on me and on Geneva. I thank God for them. They were a godsend because I could not function. We've got to take care of ourselves. You've got to take care of yourself, and counseling is not a bad word. I worked my way through my pastor. I'm going to church with y'all now. He told me, you go, you get out of that bed, and you lay on the floor. Lay on the floor, Arnette. You lie prostrate, straight before God, and you tell him what's going on. And you let him know what the devil said to you. And then you listen. And I did that. The next day was a Saturday, and there was an event at the church. And people were asking me to go, we'll come pick you up, we'll do whatever. I couldn't do it. But that Sunday morning, I got up and I put my clothes on, and I was looking a hot mess because I was doing the very best I could. But I drug myself into the church, and I sat in the back, which is not Arnette. We know that's not Arnette. But I sat at the back of the church, and I just received. I received what God had for me through the pastor. I received the music. I internalized and digested all of that. And that gave me the strength to later go for counseling and to go to grief groups. And there I learned I was not alone. That's a very important part of this thing. You're not alone.
I think that is a good place to pause, because each one of you have told your truth of your grief and things like that. Now, what I want to do is I want to come back next week. Okay, I want to. I think it's a good place to end because I want to dig into this. All right. So, on behalf of Family Affair Faith Edition, I want to thank my guests on today, and I want to say see us here again next week, same time. We will also have some information for you at the end of this episode in case you're going through grief and you need help. All right. So, on behalf of Family Affair, we want to say thank you and God bless.